Hello and welcome. The last few days we've seen the nation take a big leap forward as far as tackling mental illnesses is concerned. The Rajya Sabha has just enacted the mental health care bill. It not only decriminalizes suicide but also ensures that a person who's mentally ill is treated with dignity and the best possible care that can be given. To understand what this entire bill is about, let's try and find out from Dr. Nimesh Desai. He's Director, Institute of Human Behavior and Allied Sciences. Welcome to the show, sir. If I could first ask you, the most talked about aspect is decriminalizing suicide. Do you think this will go a long way in tackling mental health issues, problems in the country?
Significantly, I would say, to say the least. Over last 20 years, there have been a couple of Supreme Court judgments, unfortunately in opposite directions, about the section of IPC 309, which made survivors of attempted suicide punishable criminally. The old idea was that just like you don't have other rights, you don't have the right to end your life because that's nature and God-given. Science and the modern thought has kind of changed that completely. By the turn of the century, there was virtually no civilized democratic country where such a provision existed. So we are already a little late in doing so. Indirectly helping persons living with mental illness or mental health problems, it helps in as much as that, firstly, it removes the stigma and the whole social and the legal rigorous process of a person who attempts suicide out of distress or out of mental health problem, then putting him through the jail and the punitive terms. Second, more importantly, it actually destigmatizes suicide, so that, as many colleagues have argued, you'll hopefully have better reporting of completed and attempted suicides. So you have better knowledge of the trends.
Okay.
We will hopefully eventually sooner or later have the right to health care, I believe. But like we have had the right to education, this bill in the area of health is possibly the first one to, in a parliament enacted law, assert right to mental health care.
Is this the most game-changing part of this bill?
I would hope so. I'm not too sure if it will actually work out to be so, because unfortunately, without being cynical, unfortunately a whole lot of legal provisions get to effect social attitudinal change only if they are implemented well and consistently, which sadly has not been the case for mental health law as in many other laws. So in theory, yes, this would possibly be one of the biggest game changers in the current bill and the legislation process. But in practical terms, decriminalizing attempted suicide is one. The other that I would place a very high premium on, although it doesn't operate in government sector as of now as much, it will operate a lot for the private sector, profit-making sector and large masses, is the mechanism of insurance, health insurance for persons living with mental illness. Right. You know, there has been such a stigma, even in insurance policy-making bodies as well as commercially driven insurance companies, that persons living with mental illness do not get the benefits of insurance as the other health problems get. And so, in practical terms, perhaps that is one game changer, I would think. I do believe that the other practical game changer would be the diversification and the enlargement of oversight bodies.
Okay.
I'm aware that many psychiatry colleagues and our professional bodies are not comfortable with it or are extremely antagonistic to this. But being a psychiatrist, but also being a public health professional, and if I look at it in the larger socio-political context, in the 21st century, there is no way that a country like India, or for that matter, any country, can permit psychiatric or mental health practice in isolation of the socio-political context, which has a few important flags. One, consumerism and the voice of the consumer being heard, definitely for situations where the consumer or the user of the service is disabled temporarily or permanently.
How will the bill ensure that?
What it will ensure is that the various mechanisms, including the boards, mental health boards, will actually have representatives of users and carers on that board. So like I often keep saying in various fora, sadly for medical community and my colleagues and psychiatric mental health community, it's a little difficult to digest this change. But I individually believe in all seriousness that the era and the time of monolithic, paternalistic, all-powerful medical or psychiatric practice is past. it will have to be a multi-stakeholder, collective, collaborative process. I am hoping that it will happen soon, meaningfully. Sadly, if I might say, sadly, it doesn't seem that the process of preparation and revision of this bill or the enactment seems to have generated the collaborative, multi-stakeholder, positive process that should have happened at the national and state level, which could have led to the implementation being equally easy. It actually pains me a little to recognize that unfortunately the process has not yet been neutral. As many of us who have followed from various positions are aware, there are multiple stakeholder groups who have very strong views about this, and very, very interestingly, many stakeholder groups feel that this bill has a lot of lacunae. Now, that's fairly interesting because to me it seems that the platform that should have been set of a collaborative multi-stakeholder dialogue process doesn't seem to have happened too well, which doesn't augur too well for how are we going to collectively implement this.
Okay. But collective implementation is something that has to be there for this idea to succeed, the bill to succeed. Yes. Otherwise, collective effort both at the central and the state level and of all the stakeholders down the line to the lowest denominator.
Sure.
How will that be ensured?
I guess it'll have to be through not just legal enforcement but also more and more dialogues for the law to be meaningfully enforced. And there I must say I'm a little worried about the fact that the official bodies of psychiatrists in this country, not just the Indian Psychiatric Society, that I've also been a part of, an active part of, and a few other such bodies, feel rightly or wrongly or at least largely that they've been left out of the process. Now, one fact be underscored, for sure in the contemporary 21st scenario, we should and we do, many of us respect the multi-stakeholder reality. But the fact of the matter also remains that for the last 50 or 60 years in the post-independence India, if there is one group of professionals or any group of individuals who have been actively involved in the care and welfare of persons living with mental illness, it's been psychiatrists. And certainly there is no gainsaying the fact that one of the important stakeholder groups, even for next 50 years, in delivery of mental health care services is going to be psychiatrists and mental health professionals. Now, if that group actually feels so alienated and left out of the process, it again sadly doesn't.
But they also have to realize that they cannot forward this argument that look, people outside the profession are now going to have too much to say about what we actually do on the ground.
Sure. And I'm individually, with all respect for my colleagues and the fraternity that I belong to, I individually completely agree with that viewpoint.
Because in this bill, what is also happening is that the mentally ill person himself or herself is being empowered. That is a very significant aspect, and that cannot be ignored.
Absolutely. And that's something that science is supporting, ethical and humanistic viewpoints support, national and international judicial process supports, and most importantly, the United Nations Convention on Rights of Persons with Disabilities, UNCRPD 2008, that this country has not only signed but Indian Parliament has ratified, which means that we are legally bound to implement all mechanisms of UNCRPD, actually underscores what you said just now about empowering every person with disability, including persons with mental illness or psychosocial disability. So I
may be mentally disabled, but I still might have the capacity, the mental capacity to decide how I should be treated.
Sure, completely. I'm individually completely with that. Then there are two major points here to recognize, not just for our colleagues and professionals, but perhaps all our citizens. There was a time when mental illnesses and because of that the disability or the competence was considered unitary or at least binary, yes or no.
Okay.
I'm either capable or not capable. I'm either legally sane or I'm legally insane, lunatic, inverted commas, as it used to be said. Again, science and judicial humanistic process has changed that human thought completely. That there is a range of possibilities on that. One, I may be temporarily disabled and maybe temporarily partially disabled, as you correctly said, because of my illness. Okay. So the doctor or the psychiatrist or any hospital has no ground to believe that I'm completely unable. So there are those shades which the professionals will have to realize. Second, and perhaps the most important aspect, is that we in psychiatry and from mental health fraternity have been trying to drum up support for the advances in mental health practice and how we are now able to treat most people effectively. Now, to me, this is the corollary that must come from it. If I, as an individual, or my fraternity claims to the society and say, today we can treat most mental health problems easily, low cost, effectively, it goes without saying that what you are saying is correct.
Okay.
People who came to the hospital with illness in a few weeks or a few months' time
will be slightly
would
better.
have recovered enough, not least slightly, would have recovered enough to participate actively in the process. And even during that process of treatment, somebody on his or her behalf can and must participate.
And that's where advance directive also comes in. Now, that is again a very interesting provision, but that's a sword that can fall either way. It's a double-edged sword.
Yes, I do think so. And of all the controversies and difficulties around this
What
bill,
is it exactly?
See, advance directive would be essentially like, in common parlance, something that I have, again, personally and professionally been waiting for, if I might say, what's still before the consideration, for the consideration of this apex court, is advance directive in my terms of life and death would be living will.
Okay.
I can make a will, just like I can make a will about my physical properties and assets. I can make a will and say, God forbid, if my medical condition meets XYZ situation, I don't want to be put on a ventilator.
Okay.
Similarly, for mental health context, if I have a family history of schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, or if I happen to have had 2 episodes, and I believe that I would not like ECTs to be ever given to me, or I would never like to be forcefully hospitalized, I can make an advance directive.
ECT is electroconvulsive theory, just for our viewers.
Sure. Electroconvulsive therapy, very true. So I can make an advance directive legally sound to say, if ever in next 10 or 20 years I am in such a situation, XYZ thing should not be done to me. I also do believe that there are in the bill some provisions, and a law is only the conceptual part. The rules will decide the operative part. So we can still frame that. But there is a provision for how the advance directive can be turned around if it is in the interest of the person.
Okay.
So to me it seems, seriously, having considered all aspects, that the advance directive is an idea that for our culture and our socio-political system is very new. We have not worked with it as a society, I think, in any context. In mental health context, it's going to be much more difficult. And so I would really think that all of us must wait and watch and learn as to how it turns out in next 2 or 3 or 5 years, with openness of mind, with respect for other viewpoints, and see if it works well. I mean, there is no reason to believe it shouldn't work well, as long as, especially, there are administrative and quasi-judicial mechanisms for any party.
And all those people who are saying that there is a source of conflict here, the family could get alienated or marginalized over here, they also need to hold their horses and hold their opinion back.
I do think so. In all societies, and certainly in some societies like ours, the possibility of misuse or abuse of a legal provision does preoccupy us and gets the center stage often enough. I don't know if that is how it should be. Admittedly, in some countries like ours, the possibility and the reality of misuse and abuse of law is a good one. And so we can't hoodwink that. But do we have to make that as the central consideration? Should we not, can we not believe that there will be legal check and counter-check mechanisms which will take care of those possibilities of use and abuse? Sure, this country is too far and wide and diverse to be regulated easily. But that should not and cannot stop us from making good legal provisions. Right. That way we would possibly make no progress at all.
Certainly, we'll talk about this further. Sure. We're taking a very short break at this point. We'll be back with Dr. Nimesh Desai talking about the mental health care bill in just a bit. Stay tuned to Candid Conversation.
राजनीतिक स्वाधीनता या आजादी तो हमने 70 साल पहले प्राप्त कर ली थी, लेकिन ईस्ट इंडिया कंपनी की तरह आज भी हजारों विदेशी कंपनियां साबुन, शैम्पू, क्रीम, टूथपेस्ट व कोल्ड ड्रिंक्स आदि बेचकर देश की आर्थिक लूट कर रही हैं। आइए हम सब देशभक्त भारतीय इस स्वाधीनता दिवस पर पतंजलि के स्वदेश अभियान से जुड़कर देश को आर्थिक लूट व गुलामी से मुक्ति दिलाने का संकल्प लें। वंदे मातरम।
जन्म से लेकर 5 साल तक की उम्र के बच्चों को 7 बार टीकाकरण के लिए लेकर जाना है। 7 बार में से एक भी छूटना नहीं चाहिए। ये जिम्मेदारी हम सबकी है। ये जो बीच के टीके भूल जाते हैं ना, ये देखिए अच्छी बात नहीं है। सारे टीके समय से लगेंगे, तभी जानलेवा बीमारियों से बच्चों को सुरक्षा मिलेगी। 5 साल 7 बार छूटे ना टीका एक भी बार।
उत्तर प्रदेश की लगभग 20 करोड़ की आबादी में तकरीबन 19% तादाद अल्पसंख्यकों की है। युवा मुख्यमंत्री अखिलेश यादव ने राज्य के अल्पसंख्यकों की तरक्की और उन्हें मुख्य धारा से जोड़ने के लिए अलग अलग योजनाएं लागू की हैं और इन योजनाओं के लिए लगभग 2000 करोड़ रुपयों का प्रावधान रखा है।
एक शैक्षणिक हब की स्थापना की स्कीम हमने स्थापित की है और ये IHBAS कोचिंग का एक सेंटर खोला, IPS ऑल इंडिया सर्विसेज उसका, जो कि उर्दू संस्थान के द्वारा संचालित किया जा रहा है।
अल्पसंख्यक कल्याण के तहत मदरसों के आधुनिकीकरण पर जोर दिया गया है। इस मद के लिए तय किए गए 394 करोड़ रुपए, 7500 मदरसे स्वीकृत किए गए और 560 मदरसों को अनुदान दिया गया। उत्तर प्रदेश के 48 जनपदों में 140 मदरसों में मिनी ITI स्कीम के तहत कंप्यूटर शिक्षा और व्यावसायिक यानी वोकेशनल ट्रेनिंग मुफ्त दी जा रही है।
हम यहाँ पर आए थे, हम अपना सीख ही रहे थे कि हमें यहाँ पर से हमें तालीम गानी सेंटर कॉलेज में जॉब मिल गई है।
अल्पसंख्यक समुदाय के छात्र छात्राओं को इंजीनियरिंग और मेडिकल कोर्स में दाखिले के लिए मुफ्त कोचिंग भी दी जा रही है।
इस कोचिंग से बहुत ही संतुष्ट हूँ और बहुत सारे स्टूडेंट्स सेलेक्ट हो चुके हैं।
उत्तर प्रदेश सरकार ने 5000 से ज्यादा कब्रिस्तानों के इर्द गिर्द 4 दीवारी बनवाने के लिए 400 करोड़ रुपए भी आवंटित किए। उत्तर प्रदेश सरकार की अल्पसंख्यक कल्याण योजनाओं से इस एक बड़े तबके को काफी लाभ हो रहा है और उनको ये विश्वास हो रहा है कि प्रदेश सरकार के विकास में उनकी भी बराबर की भागीदारी है।
सुपर बाइक से लेकर ट्रक तक सब दौड़ाते हैं। सारे देश का इंजन हम ही तो चलाते हैं। HP लुब्रिकेंट्स A to Z आपके काम आते हैं।
युवा मुख्यमंत्री अखिलेश यादव की सरकार जनता की सरकार है। ये सरकार कहीं बंधु है, कहीं मित्र, तो कहीं हेल्पलाइन। फिल्म बंधु, उद्योग बंधु, निवेश मित्र, तो वहीं महिलाओं को सशक्त बनाती 1090 हेल्पलाइन और महिला उद्यमी योजना। राज्य में डिजिटल डिवाइड खत्म करती मुफ्त लैपटॉप वितरण योजना। जरूरतमंदों को पलक झपकते मदद पहुंचाती 108 समाजवादी एम्बुलेंस सेवा। कौशल विकास योजना, जन सुनवाई, जनता दर्शन, लोकवाणी सेवा केंद्र के जरिए मुख्यमंत्री खुद आम जनता से मुलाकात करते हैं। ये तमाम योजनाएं लोगों को मुश्किल हालात से जूझने की ताकत देने के साथ उन्हें नए सपने देखने का हौसला दे रही हैं। ये जनता के दर्द और जरूरतों का एहसास ही है कि मुख्यमंत्री अखिलेश यादव ने किसानों से लेकर समाज के वंचित वर्गों की मदद के लिए कई योजनाएं बनाई हैं। इनमें खास हैं 2700 करोड़ रुपए खर्च करके बेमौसम बारिश और कर्ज के बोझ से जूझ रहे लगभग 50 लाख किसानों को दी ऋण माफी। रानी लक्ष्मीबाई पेंशन योजना के तहत 1250 करोड़ रुपयों की व्यवस्था। बेरोजगारी योजना भत्ता के लिए 1200 करोड़ रुपयों का इंतजाम। वृद्ध और किसान पेंशन योजना के तहत 1683 करोड़ रुपयों का अनुमोदन। जनेश्वर मिश्र ग्राम योजना के तहत 2818 गांवों में विकास कार्यों की शुरुआत।
माननीय मुख्यमंत्री जी ने विशेष पोर्टल भी शुरू किए हैं जिसमें लोगों के मोबाइल नंबर लेके वो डायरेक्टली उनसे पूछ भी रहे हैं कि आपको विकास योजना को क्या लाभ मिला या क्या नहीं मिला।
साथ ही मुख्यमंत्री अखिलेश यादव की अधिकारियों को सख्त हिदायत है कि वो लाभार्थियों के साथ जिला मुख्यालय में मीटिंग करके उनकी शिकायतें दूर करें।
अधिकारियों के यहाँ बार बार जाते थे, अब उसे निजात मिली है इस सरकार में कि अधिकारी जो है खुद गांव-गांव आ रहे हैं।
मुख्यमंत्री अखिलेश यादव का जनता के दर्द को महसूस करने का ये जज्बा एहसास करवाता है कि अखिलेश यादव सरकार शासक नहीं बल्कि जनता की शुभचिंतक है।
डी से डिफेंस हो या ई से इलेक्ट्रिसिटी, सारे देश का इंजन हम ही तो चलाते हैं। HP Lubricants, A to Z आपके काम आते हैं।
Welcome back. Here with Candid Conversation, we're talking about the mental health care bill, which has just been passed in the Rajya Sabha, and we have Dr. Nimesh Desai with us talking about it. Dr. Desai, you've spoken about advance directive. We also dwelt a bit about the shock therapy that is given, and there is restrictions placed on that now. Again, there's mixed opinion about this in the profession, but do you feel that this is the right time to bring in these restrictions?
Let me try and summarize a variety of views in a few sentences. As a psychiatrist for over 35 years, I do believe that in some specific situations, ECT, electroconvulsive therapy, is and can be life-saving.
Okay.
I really believe that it is and it should be seen at par with the DC shock that you do when there is cardiac arrest. As I often say, unfortunately, social attitudes do not place both at the same level. In a film or in real world, when somebody applies DC shock and the person revives, we all clap. ECT is same. Milliamperes of current pass for milliseconds across the brain, scientifically studied rigorously for being safe. Having said that, as I often say to myself and to my colleagues and groups and teams, it's also true that science, any science and certainly human sciences, have to practice in the socio-political context. Okay. Obviously, we have across the globe and including this country somewhere not succeeded or perhaps failed in getting the social attitudes to be suitably changed about ECTs. If that is so, we will have to accept what society and lawmakers put as restrictions on us. Namely in this bill, direct ECT, that is without...
Sounds like a compromise.
I wouldn't see them as compromises. I would actually see them as respect for social political reality. Okay. Second, ECT without anesthesia, direct ECT as they are called, or ECT in children under 12 or under 18 years of age. I do think that since there can be a provision for approaching the board, mental health board, in 1 out of 2,000 or 5,000 or 10,000 cases, if I still feel the need or my team still feels the need, I can approach the board and do so. So somewhere the larger reality, one might say, and I'll keep coming back to the same, somewhere all of us seem to have collectively not succeeded or possibly failed in getting a positive dialogue going. So this controversies, and especially the difficulties that my psychiatry fraternity and community has about advance directives, about ECTs, I do believe could have been lesser, if not resolved, with more meaningful dialogue.
Okay. Now, there's also concern, and it could be genuine, in terms of the kind of infrastructure that is required to ensure that this bill is properly implemented once it comes into being, and that requires a huge amount of investment. And since health is a state subject, there's some concern about proper funding as well. Do you feel that concern is justified?
Having been on many sides of this argument as implementer of mental health programs, hospital and community based, being part of policy making bodies at national and state levels, and also being part of the fraternity, again this is a mixed bag for me. Till 15 or 20 years ago, there certainly used to be the problem of resource crunch for health programs and mental health programs. But as the policy makers in various positions, including health ministry, now say, last 15 or 20 years, sadly, there have been funds allocated which have not been utilized. This is a bit of the conundrum of circular argument, because there is a huge deficit of adequate mental health professionals. There isn't the possibility of running all the programs that the government provides funds for, and the human resource generation in mental health, although focused on, has suffered. So I do believe that here there will be some innovation in how do we want to run the mental health programs for next 20 or 30 years till you can build enough human resource. Okay. Sadly, a large part of resource allocation or administrative push in last 30 years for mental health has come from judicial activism, and I say that is sad not because of anything else. It's great that judicial activism has brought that about. What is sad is that admittedly, the professionals and every other stakeholder group again seems to have not succeeded in pushing the agenda, nor has the executive.
Okay. But now that this bill is here, we can hope that there will be a sufficient push in the first place to get a proper estimate of how large is the problem of mental illness in the country, of which we don't really have a firm grip on, do we?
There have been some studies. You don't have a firm grip. It will always be a bit fluid. But there are some studies, especially from the Ministry and Nimesh Bangalore, that will hopefully next 6 months or 1 year bring out that data. But the thing is, the question is this. Do we always need to know the extent of the problem?
Because the estimates, if they're correct, 5 to 6% is a huge number.
Yes, but you see, the thing is, sometimes we perhaps get lost in science instead of policy implementation. For example, I mean, does it make a huge difference whether a certain problem is of the range of 15.73 or 16.23? You see, the point is,
it doesn't. At the operational level, it doesn't.
People who need help. And one hopes that the rules that will be framed following this legislation and the implementing mechanisms which will be formed will be pragmatic and with some teeth.
Okay.
One has to say here that the Central Mental Health Authority, of which by position I happen to have been a member for the last 6 years, having been Director IHBAS, has met, which is supposed to meet annually, has met once in last 6 years.
Okay. Since you spoke about teeth, there is a provision for, there's a penal provision as well, but again it's being said that it's 6 months and 10,000 or 10,000 fine, but it's not specific as to what kind of violations will really invoke this penal provision.
Yeah, see, the point is that once there is the assertion of the right of each person living with mental illness to care, and not just care, but his or her right to care with dignity, as UNCRPD and all such legislations require, there will have to be some provisions for penalty. Now, the operationalization of this again is a matter of detail, as long as we agree with the principle. The second part is, if there are apprehensions in any stakeholder group, including psychiatrists and mental health communities, of this being abused, I do believe that one has to and one does trust the legal judicial system of the country. There are mechanisms within this legislation for review and appeal, and outside of this legislation, there are always the basic judicial review mechanisms available. So, I think the provision is good and there to stay.
You know, we're coming to the end of the show. Just tell us, in terms of mental illness, what would be the most helpful thing for people themselves to do? Because we've seen now there's a tendency among people to recognize the problem, to talk about it. We've seen how it happened when Deepika Padukone was depressed. She came out of it and then she spoke about it openly to create awareness. Do you think that is the biggest help that you know, this problem really needs, in terms of people coming out openly and speaking about the problems that they face?
Oh, absolutely. At a generic level, more openness and destigmatization and positivity, if possible, about all aspects related to person living with mental illness is surely the panacea that we all should wait for.
And this bill will promote that?
In theory, it should. How well it will do in practice or not is going to depend on all of us, not just individually, but multiple stakeholder groups. And I do fervently hope that that process will happen. I'm not too sure if it will, but I do believe and hope that it will, and it should. The time is ripe for the Indian society to begin to recognize that mental health problems is a harsh reality, however uncomfortable in a number of ways.
Well, let's hope that happens, and this
Yes,
bill triggers that. Thank you so much for speaking to us for Candid Conversation. Thank you for joining us.